Hello everybody. I wanted to make a response video to Auron McIntyre's latest video, Populism and the Multipolar World, with guest Dr. Steve Turley. The video is broken up into three parts: the rise of populism, the concept of civilizational populism, and then multipolarity. And I want to respond to the various claims made here and some of the theses that are put forth by Dr. Steve Turley. In the first part, when he's talking about the rise of populism and the concept of civilizational populism, he's making the claim that identity politics is going to be the future. He's creating a certain narrative around Brexit, Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen, the Sweden Democrats, the Farmers' Revolts, Yellow Vests, all of these, right-wing populist forces that are coming up in Europe and the United States, and making the claim that there's a common thread between all of these political movements, and that is identity politics, or the re-emergence of identity politics, particularly in the form of tradition. It's very much in the Steve Turley brand to sit and talk about the conservative Renaissance, Orthodox Christianity, re-traditionalization, blood, soil, and spirit coming back into the world as a reaction and a rejection of global cosmopolitanism, the demons in Davos, the rootless globalism that is making us consumers or whatever. So as a sort of counterpoint to this thesis, I will say that I agree with one thing, and that is that identity politics is going to be the future. But where I think I disagree is that it's not going to be any kind of rooted, deeply traditional Christian nationalistic identity politics. It will be just straight up white identity politics. And the reason I think so is because I don't think Dr. Steve Turley is giving enough credit to liberal globalism. In a sense, my opinion is that the general public and even the disgruntled people who support these populist parties have a much larger buy-in to the globalist project than either Auron McIntyre or Steve Turley wants to admit. Say like the concept of laptop nationalism, for example. If you take someone like Tommy Robinson, who is actually a guy with Irish heritage who now lives in Cyprus and sits on his laptop and just agitates for protests inside of Britain with the sort of two-tier justice system, or someone like Andrew Tate, who has multiple citizenships and is sitting in Romania, pushing a lot of these populist rhetoric. If you look at, say, the United States election right now, it's like everybody in the West, in the broader world, is participating, even though they're not rooted to the United States. So even the concept of nationalism is a sort of like a national populism is a globalist idea. They honestly don't care. They don't care really that you're from the same place as them, or that you believe in the same things, or what you believe, or who you are specifically. It's more of a general sharing of a sentiment that you look slightly like me, and you share my sentiment in regards to my discontent with the Western elites. So because everybody is so online now, they've more or less have bought into globalism. And as long as that infrastructure remains in place, you're not going to see a return to the soil in that sense, that there's going to be a kind of rootedness to it. That stuff is completely gone. I also believe that mostly, if you look at, say, the European populists, they have more or less embraced pan-Europeanism completely. And I mean, Turley makes this point implicitly as well, when he's talking about like these various populist parties that are holding speeches, and they're not complaining about other European countries, they're complaining about the globalist elites. But that's also because they don't really recognize the differences between themselves and other European nations that live under the same system, that grow up on the internet and interact inside the same economy. So that's also a point where they have completely bought into the globalist way of thinking. So I mean, like 100 or 200 years ago, like thinking that, say, like a German or a Frenchman is the exact same thing, or that a Norwegian or a Pole or something is kind of has a similar identity, it would just be unthinkable. But that's kind of where we are now, where people are talking about white flight across borders, you know, if there's too many immigrants in Sweden, then we could go live in Hungary, and so on. So that's one point against the thesis. Another point is the secularization. The spirit part of Blood, Soil, and Spirit is also very much on the bubble, considering the rapid secularization of European and American youth. They are not on the whole moving back to religion. They're very much secularizing and have little interest in church participation, to the degree that they have the religion that is being practiced is an entirely political form of Christianity in most cases, like you see with the Groypers and the Nick Fuentes types, who really just take on religion as a form of doing, you know, culture war politics, in a sense. They have very little interest about genuine Christian communities, for example. So, as a summary of those points, you know, I completely reject the idea that they're putting forward here, that the future of geopolitics is going to be some type of like breaking up of the EU and the NATO to form new alliances on the basis of religion, sort of like Catholic blocks, Catholic civilizations, Protestant civilizations in Europe. That it's just a completely gone idea. There's nothing in reality that reflects that. What is actually happening is that there's a form of white unity among people in the West who feel like they are being underserved by their governments, particularly in regard to immigration. Then it's about cost of living and opportunities. Some of these problems can be solved, and it is worth making those attempts. Other problems, say like the general increase in wealth in the same way that their parents had, I don't think they're going to see that, and they will have to just adjust to the modern world. Okay, so now I want to address some of the claims that are made in the multipolarity part of the video. I mean, there's various things to break down here, like the claims that China is reverting to Confucianism over communism, which is patently absurd. I don't want to go too much into it in this video, but I want to address some of the claims that are made in regards to Russia. So let's just listen in on Mr. Steve Turley.
In the history of democracy, and they've just won in the next two elections. They're all saying the same thing. In order to stand up against this broken globalism, we're going to have to return to civilization. Tiny little nation, micronations ain't going to do it. They're just not going to do it. Break it. Liechtenstein, I love Liechtenstein, but you're not going to stand up against this, like you're saying, this massive, the most scaled political and economic movement in human history. Civilizations are going to have to rise up. A unipolar world's going to have to turn into a multipolar world. And Russia proved it's happening. Russia is now the single most sanctioned nation on the planet. They surpassed Iran for that, and yet their economy is booming. The ruble was the number one currency in 2023, and they're booming. Why? Because they reoriented their economy to China, and China has paralleled everything we do here. They have a parallel SWIFT called KIPS. They have parallel MasterCard and Visas called UnionPay, which are actually bigger. They have more of the market than MasterCard.
Yeah, let's just stop it there. So there's some interesting claims to that in terms of the Russian booming economy. First, I want to address the claim that the ruble is the number one currency in 2023. I don't know what that means. If there's a currency award anywhere where people are just giving a prize to what they consider the best currency, you have strong and weak currencies, and there's a concept of that in forex markets. And I can tell you that the ruble has not been anywhere near the strongest currency in 2023. We could take a look at some stats on the ruble. So here you have a chart comparing the value of between rubles to United States dollars, and I mean, it is somewhat correct, as Dr. Steve Turley is saying, that in 2023 the ruble had a boost, as you can see here. Of course, this was a political thing. Russia was hit by sanctions in 2022, and then the ruble tanked. So they did some political measures, like the central bank buying up rubles to keep the ruble strong, or forcing businessmen to trade specifically in rubles to basically artificially pump the ruble up. And they've been doing that since 2023. But since then, you can see that it's been going downwards again to an almost all-time low in 2024, where now it is like $1 to 100 rubles. Not exactly the top currency in the world, or a booming economy. I mean, we could look at the same. Here's a chart over Russia's GDP, where you can see very clearly sanctioning from the West coming in here in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea in Ukraine. They were hit by sanctions from the West, and you could see a very clear drop in GDP, where they're sort of back to pre-2010 levels, and they have to just slowly try to work themselves back up again. And now in 2022, the war started, and they have like a very high GDP, but it's not a consumer economy anymore. They've reoriented their economy to be a war economy, which is like, you know, they're printing money, they're paying people, everybody's being employed. You have to pay people quite highly to be soldiers, so that is accounted for in the economy. But there are other indicators, say like the interest rate, for example, where they pushed up the interest rates in 2022. They put it down again, and now they have to put it back up to combat inflation. So the current Russian interest rate is now at 19%. It's not exactly a sign of a booming economy, typically. So, I mean, in the West, we've been complaining because we've had an interest rate of maybe 6% to deal with the fallout of COVID and lockdowns. But like the Russians are dealing with like an almost 20% interest rate. It's it's hardly a healthy economy. The last point he made was that of China reorienting their Russia reorienting their economy to China, which is then supposed to replace everything that the West could provide and make things easy for them. Well, in some sense, it hasn't. You can see Russia still has. Sorry, I need to refresh this one. Russia is still dealing with, liquidity issues to the point where now they're trading barter basically with countries like Pakistan, using rice and potatoes and tangerines because Pakistan doesn't even want rubles. So the transaction part has not been that simple, as well as the relationship between Russia and China, which is something that the BRICS fanboys usually tout. But it's a very asymmetrical relationship. Russia is a military power, but it is not an economic power that rivals China. As you can see here, where you have a chart that's breaking down China's export by country, where you see as the main importer of Chinese goods is the United States, that is at 15%. And the rest of the world, including European countries, are taking up most of the space here, whereas Russia is barely at 3.4%. So Russia is like a very small partner, and China is sort of hit by sanctions if they become too Russia friendly. So Russia is at a very disadvantage here. It's not an even relationship at all, whereas Russia has nobody else to turn to but China, and China still wants to maintain a decent relation with the rest of the Western world, simply for economic reasons. One last thing that I wanted to discuss regarding this video is really some of the consequences and the fallout of the vision that I think Dr. Steve Turley is imagining. So I'll just play a clip here that is a bit earlier in the video, where he talks about how Russia, India, and China are sort of building up towards traditional civilizations to resist global liberalism.
Of a new era. Certainly Yeltsin was that for Russia in the 1990s, but you saw starting in the 2000s, Putin, and you really see it explicitly in 2012 when he runs for a third term, Putin makes it absolutely explicit. Russian civilization is rising, and they are going to be a core for this larger orthosphere. President Xi makes more references.
Yeah, I mean, Russia, regarding the ortho stuff, Russia is multi-ethnic, right? And they're just as interested in maintaining a Muslim population as they are maintaining the ortho population, which is in fact shrinking in Russia, whereas the Muslim population is increasing, and you're seeing that in. I mean, if you look at their war propaganda, or the way that they're profiling themselves online, they're very much interested in trying to get at being more of like a, we believe in God in a sense. We're like a deist imperium, not so much just like a pure ortho space, even though that might be a comfortable profile for Turley.
to Confucianism than he does to communism. So they're going back to their traditions and customs as they see the CCP as a particular modern embodiment of classical Confucian and Taoist principles. You're seeing it in India with the rise of Narendra Modi and the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, the Hindu Nationalist Party, the largest, by far, largest nationalist, largest Democrat party in the world. They're thoroughly Hindu nationalists. India went 20 years without a landslide win. 20 years the Indian Congress could never get a full majority. They always had to coalition with other parties. And when the BJP ran as a thoroughly nationalist Hindu party to institute Hindutva, which is, for lack of a better term, I've actually asked a Hindu this, and he said, yeah, this is a good description. It's, for lack of a better term, it's basically like a Hindu version of Sharia law in Islam. They ran on that platform, and they won almost 2/3 of seats. It was the biggest landslide victory ever seen in the history of democracy, and they just won in the next 2 elections. They're all saying the same thing. In order to stand up against this broken globalism, we're going to have to return to civilization. Tiny little nation, micronations ain't going to do it. They're just not.
So, I mean, what he's saying about India is true for... it's true in terms of what I know as well. My question to Dr. Steve Turley, and I guess Auron McIntyre as well, if they are such fans of this multipolar world order where, let's say, India is going back to their traditional roots, or instituting some sort of what do you call Hindu Sharia law, which, I mean, of course, other people call it Hindu nationalism, which is what's going on there. And China is now going back to a more hardline, say, conservative, Confucianist combination, you know, communism with Confucian characteristics, or whatever you want to call it, is the fact that people who have other beliefs in those nations are going to be pushed out and persecuted, which those beliefs could include Christianity, which I know both of them are a fan of. So I have a map here from opendoors.org, which is a sort of Christian organization that tracks persecution of Christians around the world. And you could, for instance, look at India here, that is in the red zone. India has like 71 million Christians, 5% of their population, and they are like one of the worst countries in the world in terms of persecution, in terms of violence and intrusions into the lives of Christians in India. Like, this is very much a part of that project, is to sort of push out these large Christian, or these emerging populations in those countries. The same with China, who has an even larger population. It's almost 100 million Christians who live in China, but they are going to be persecuted and surveilled and really just disenfranchised as much as possible in order to make room for this civilizational anti-liberal project that Steve Turley is such a fan of. And it's a very strange contradiction. By on one hand, they're talking about like this emergence of Christianity and trying to proselytize Christianity, while on the other hand, they're very much promoting civilizational forces that are pushing out Christianity in the emerging parts of the third world, that is sort of these industrializing, developing nations. And it's a contradiction that I've never seen them explain in any meaningful way. I wonder if this is something that they're thinking about at all when they're going out there pushing this stuff. But yeah, that's all I have, so I'm just going to finish the video. Thanks for watching.